Dobro večer, good evening everyone. And a few minutes ago I've just learned some Icelandic, so I will say góða kvöldið, maybe? They said me that it's good evening, thank you. So welcome to our second conversation this evening. I'm very excited to talk to Sölvi Björn Sigurðsson and Jónas Reynir Gunnarsson. And for the introduction, I will just tell a few short words about our guests. So Sölvi is the author of 7 novels, 3 non-fiction works, and 6 poetry books. He is also a passionate translator of classical poetry and has translated the works of Keats, Rimbaud, Shakespeare, and others into Icelandic. Born in a small border town in the 80s, he spent most of his 20s traveling around Europe before becoming a small town kid again in Iceland's capital. And in 2020, he received the Icelandic Literary Award for his novel Zelda. He has since published another novel and is currently working on the next, and maybe we will hear something about it during this evening. And Jónas grew up in Felber, a small village in the east of Iceland. He has garnered much attention for his novels Connecting Flight, Starfish, and Death of the Forest, and the last of which was nominated for the Icelandic Literary Prize and the European Union Prize for Literature. Also, he has received the Thomas Gudmundsson Literary Award and the Poetry Prize for his poetry books. So after this introduction, to start this conversation, I have a really easy question for you. So how did you feel when you were invited to participate in our review, and when you got this opportunity to introduce yourself and your work to the Croatian audience for the first time?
Would you like to start? Or?
Sure.
Yeah.
Or you start and I'll interrupt.
All right. Okay.
Good plan.
I was
actually it was like they said earlier. It's such a joy when you're writing in a language only 300-something thousand people speak, and a small percentage of those people read books, and a tiny percentage of them read my books. So every time
3 readers.
Yeah, probably no, but to be translated, even if it's just a sample, it's always wonderful to get, because it's can be a solitary and a kind of isolating thing to write, where you are kind of closed off in a room by yourself, and you're closed off in the book you're writing, and you're closed off in the language you're writing in. So every time a door opens, it's kind of wonderful. So just the translating part is great, but I'm also really impressed by this club you have. Like, I think it's important work you're doing, and we who write and we who love literature, we are like in debt to passionate people who are like carrying the torch. And so yeah, I'm impressed. I want to have a place like this in Iceland.
Yeah, I agree totally with Jónas. We were actually talking about this at the morning coffee here at 10 o'clock, that we sort of lack a place like this in Iceland. We have a really good coffee shop on Laugaveg 18, which used to be the oldest bookshop in Iceland. But it's, everything becomes a bit fancy, and this has this really indie and genuine feeling. So I truly celebrate you for having that. And now I felt quite, blissfully surprised when I was invited here. I've been around the eastern part of Europe. I went to Bulgaria as a kid, and went to Belgrade, when I was in my 20s, but I've never been to Croatia, and it's really delightful to be here and to meet a really generous and lovely people here. So I've been having good so far.
Well, thank you for the compliments, and I hope that when you open your first bookshop or something, that we will be the first to get the invitation.
Be the guests
so.
of
yeah, I
the
mean,
ceremony. Yeah.
that's only fair, you know.
Yes.
We're gonna take as much use of the space as we can. So there's gonna be art cinema, and we're gonna have like a print-on-demand printer.
Of course.
And so it's going to be a publishing house, a bookshop, and a place for people to meet and fall in love.
And the romantic
plus
place.
Circumstances under the rainy Reykjavik sky. But the only thing missing is that we haven't found the sort of space.
We can build it, come on.
We can build it. There's plenty of land in Iceland.
Yeah. So you opened this theme of Icelandic literary scene and bookshops, and while I was preparing for this conversation, I read somewhere, and it was really interesting idea for me, that everyone in Iceland is in a way encouraged to be a writer. I mean, there is some opinion that you have a right to be a writer in a way, and that self-publishing is really an interesting way to be introduced to the literary scene. So maybe if you can comment on that and maybe compare to your experience, when did you start and how did you start writing? Because also it was interesting for me to find out that the Nobel Prize winner, sorry, I started to learn Icelandic just this evening, so it's called, he's called Halldór Laxness.
Laxness, yeah.
Laxness, maybe, thank you. So he published his first book when he was just 17 years old. So maybe if you can compare that experience to yours.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm quite ignorant of how it is in other countries, but there have been bestsellers and critically acclaimed books who have been self-published in Iceland. I only started a few years ago in this business, and I feel since I started there have been some really small independent publishing houses, and they sometimes, it's like a pop-up store almost. They, for example, I published the last poetry book I published in 2019 was published by a really small publishing house, which is only one man, my friend, and he also has he's also teaching yoga. So he publishes maybe 1 or 2 books every 1 or 2 years, and teaches men yoga. And it's just it's a lovely vibe that comes with it, I think.
Of course, and on self-publishing, I can say so many things. I think my first 3 or 4 publications were self-publications, and in a way I think I became forced to become a writer because my mother, I was 8 then, she went to this lighthouse at the most northern part of Iceland. This was in 1987, and there was basically nothing to do, and we had TV on Thursdays, I think, but usually the connection was disturbed, so there was basically no TV, and I was there alone with 2 grown-ups, and there was about 200 miles towards the next town. And there were like Tintin books, and then some like old shit about Horbjerg, which is that place I was in. So I started reading those books just to, have something to do. And this is what made me strange, It's not normal for an 8-year-old to read dialogues about bears eating pajamas for the survival of the humankind. And after that summer, I published my first book in one script. I sold it for 2 glasses of milk and a cake slice. And I also started a magazine, which I published 3 times, about the birds and all the creatures living at that place. So I think I was genuinely forced to self-publication when I became grown up. So my first book, poetry, was I went to a canvas store and bought some paint, and I rolled it in my student flat and painted it blue, and then I cut it down into A5 pieces, and went to a copy shop and had the interiors printed, and then I just glued it together or something. So that was my first book of poetry, 20-something years ago. So, and I think, self-publication makes you, like William Blake, the English author, who had a print machine in his house, was, during the French Revolution. It gives you something extra to do everything yourself, just to have a piece of art left. But now I'm a friend or a scapegoat or something of capitalism. So I just sent in a manuscript, had my book published, and
so something like logistically, it's much easier to publish poetry and self-publishing
logistically,
than novels.
There is no logic in publishing poetry.
That's true.
But it's good to know that there is an option. So
there is an option.
Before this review, you both gave a short interview for our website, Booksina. It was really interesting for me that Sölvi, when asked to describe a literary scene in Iceland in only one sentence, and you can comment on that, you said that it's a continuum of a strong tradition in an exciting renewal. So can you maybe elaborate that a little bit? And Jonas also, you can join with your comment.
To go first? Or?
No.
Okay.
It's your thing.
Okay, it's my sentence. So, we had a literary tradition in Iceland since people came there. I think the first documented article. I mean, we have a Völuspá from 984, and the scriptures tell us that. I think we have manuscripts from 1080 something, and the Icelandic sagas were written in the 12th and 11th century. And this was a blossoming time in Iceland because no one had been there before. The weather was nice, people got rich, the rivers were full of salmon, there were berries on the trees, and it was kind of a nice place to live in for the few people who came. And then we had centuries of both. The weather was much worse during the middle centuries, and there were wars, when you have something great, people fight for it. And so our literary tradition went to like cutting the manuscripts down and wearing them as clothes, just for warmth, because they were cut out of cow skin. And then in the 18th century, Árni Magnússon, he's called the manuscript collector. He sort of went around the country and collected what was left of our literary tradition and brought it to Copenhagen for survival. And in the 19th century, we had like, you know, students and poets who went to Denmark and sort of survived the old passion that we had for literature. And I think we still, so there is a storyline through all our centuries. And I think we truly think of ourselves as a literary nation. And especially those of us who are brought up in literature and reading and like being able to read and remember poems and being connected to books. It's a minority in our days because, you know, there's so much entertainment, Netflix and cinema and all that stuff. But despite that, we still have quite, you know, a lot of people interested in books because books are different from seeing. And it gives you, it's a communication to read a book. It's a friend in a way. So I still believe that our literary tradition survives, and now we have like this like course in or education in the university, which is bringing out lots of really talented writers as well. And perhaps Jónas can tell you more about that because he went through it.
Yeah, I think one feels this literary tradition Sölvi was describing, this storyline kind of from the beginning of the country until now. And we have looked at ourselves as a literary nation, and I think when you're working as a writer today, you have to work against being bitter in some ways, because it's easy to think like why you wish people were reading more and were more appreciative. And sometimes when politicians talk about literature, you feel like we are not a literary nation anymore. It feels like a guy who was great at soccer when he was in high school. Now he has like a belly and he has a beard and he goes like, I am a sports guy. Like in the same way we are saying we are literary people. But that's when you're bitter. But there is, it is lively today. And as Sölvi said, the university, lots of people are going to the university to study creative writing, and people are publishing poetry books. I think especially poetry in the last maybe 10 years or something has had quite a boom. So there is a lot going on, and it is lively, and it is connected. This nice sense of feeling being connected to this tradition, but I feel it's also really delicate, and we are dependent on government grants to live, to do this as a living. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. It was really interesting, and I guess that every author that is in our anthology is a part of this exciting renewal that you said. So I hope they are. So maybe to jump on and say something about your literary interests. So you both write novels and poetry. And I'm curious to know, can you maybe compare a little bit the writing process for you? Can you maybe compare these both mediums, and why do they appeal to you? What do they offer to you?
I think of fiction writing or writing novels as it's somehow connected to being neurotism, and you are imagining scenarios, you're imagining conversations, thinking of the worst thing that could happen. Psychologists call it catastrophic thinking. Like if you're doing this in your life, you have mental problems, like you need help. But if you write it down, then you're making a story. And poetry is maybe that's more a way of interacting with life creatively, I feel. And poetry is not just for writing poems. And for example, children are all poets. Like when we were young, we are all poets. And I sometimes think about when my nephew was young. It was around Christmas time, and his parents were hyping up Christmas for him. They were always telling him, Christmas is coming, and told him about the gifts and the tree and everything and the food. And then on Christmas Eve, everybody was getting ready, taking a bath and doing the dinner, and he was always going out to the front door and like looking outside. And finally they asked him, like, what? Get inside, what are you doing? And he said, I want to see Christmas. So he thought like Christmas was some sort of a creature that would arrive and go into the house. And this appeal is he was thinking like a poet, and he was looking beyond the meaning of the words and the language. And so that's somehow explains the difference, I think, for me.
Really beautifully put.
Yeah, about that, I've heard from so many of my colleague writers recently that, writing is sort of an escapism towards sanity. And it's something that a person has to do, to follow a storyline through your own life, and the best way to do it is to write it down in some sort of way. Many people hold a diary or whatever. I don't know why we do it, but I think there's a need to do it, and an enjoyment we celebrate and perhaps don't find in other aspects of life. In a way, if I stop writing, I just get dull or bored, and I even though I don't have the temperament that day to write, I still write, just something.
So we should now say something about your novels that are represented in our anthology. These are just the extracts, but we hope that we will read them soon, fully translated in Croatian. But for now, we have our anthology, and Sölvi, we have fragments from your novel, from your novel, The Flower, and fragments for your most recent novel, Kopernika. In Croatian, the subtitle is Roman o ubojstvu, ljubavi i netrpeljivosti. So the subtitle is, it's a novel about murder, love, and impatience. And Jonas, we have chapters, I think the first two chapters, right, from your novel, The Death of a Forest. znači Smrt šume. Can you maybe introduce the idea, what was behind the creating your novels? Why was important for you to tell the stories that you tell?
This book actually was inspired by real life events that rarely happens in my case, but the protagonist in the story is a man living in a small village in Iceland, and he has a small forest that his father grew and planted the trees, and they took care of for many years. And then mudslide destroys the forest and reveals bombs in the dirt from underneath the trees from the Second World War, when the British were occupying Iceland and had military practice. So these are kind of the main events that start this book. And I am from a small village, like it was said earlier, and I also have a small forest, or my family has been taking care of a small forest, has a small patch of land, and it happened on a much smaller scale, but a mudslide happened there. So that was kind of planted a seed, to use a forestry metaphor, planted a seed of a story in my head, and because this place for me is the most peaceful place on earth. It's my favorite place. It's trees my family planted and we've been taking care of, and it's kind of a sanctuary. So it was really uncomfortable to see trees just falling down, or a small hill destroyed of the forest. And the bombs came in also from a real life event. It happened a few, maybe 1 or 2 decades after the end of the Second World War, in the east of Iceland, where a family was killed, a farmer, and I think his daughter and his niece were killed stepping on a family. They were on horseback. So this was kind of the inspiration for me, and this feeling this created in me was kind of a feeling of a desperate need for a quiet place, or for serenity, I guess, and that became kind of the drive for the protagonist in the story.
Thank you. And you?
The need to tell my latest novel.
No, just a few sentences about Copernica. You know, what was the main idea behind creating it?
I had always been taken by the life of Icelanders in the 19th century in Copenhagen, and just about this journey going from like a really remote and sort of uncivilized society, because this was a society of farmers, and you know, we didn't really have a city until the 20th century, and to imagine what, you know, meant. There were only males, because, you know, women weren't allowed to travel for that in those days. So I always had in my mind to write a story about that connection, about Icelanders in the 19th century, and sort of, you know, the meetup between those two nations. And then, like as a teenager or as a 20-something, I was really into like horror films and serial killer stories. So I just combined those two things in Copernica. A lot of like historical research behind it, and then I had to really have a good plot, and I still believe it's a great plot. You get surprised when you find out who the killer really is.
Now I'm curious to find out. Maybe I will ask you later to tell me.
I'm not
To
going to tell
spoil
you.
me the novel. So yeah, both of your stories deal with tragic loss in a way. And what I could read from the fragments was the characters are trying to escape some kind of trauma and leave maybe their past and find some new present. In your case, it's a death of a friend that we find out in the first few pages that we can read from the anthology. And Jonas, in your case, it's like I read it like a generational trauma, you know, and so it's really interesting for me that in that kind of dark themes, you still included a bit of humor, which is always an interesting topic for me, because my opinion is that when we laugh, in a way we leave a crack open, you know, so we become more receptive and more, in a way we create space for connection with another being. So I would be curious, how do you see humor as a literary tool, or maybe you can tell us a little bit how did you use it in your novels?
I think I use humor as kind of a like a barometer or a quality test. Like if the text I'm writing isn't a little bit funny, then I'm not being honest enough, I think. Because if you're being honest and if you're being kind of truthful, and I'm not saying realistic maybe, but then it's usually some part of it's funny, I think. But it's also really subjective. One novel I wrote, a reader sent me a message and he told me he laughed so much that he was always waking up his wife who was sleeping next to him. And I told this to another person who had read the book, and they said there's nothing funny in this book. So yeah, maybe it's there if you're receptive to it, but that's also something magical about humor, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, I think humor is in a way the most sincere way of having communication, because it's been through a whirlwind and it can come from in grief, but in the end, you know, you're not left with anything but laughter if you really want to survive. You know, I lost my bag, by the way, on the tour here, and you know, the only thing I can do about that is just, you know, I've written to several companies and had telecalls, and but now I can just laugh. And well, you know, you can't be humorous all around the whole novel, because you know, if you are writing about grief or something, you know, we have to have some dull pages in between, and then you have to make up for that with some kind of depth or like lyrical observations, and it's, you know, describing humanity is the task of a writer, and there are so many aspects of a human person, and humor is definitely one of them. And I don't like books that don't have one joke. And serious writers often put in a joke, you know, even though they're writing about things not to laugh about. But it's also, you know, the gentle humor of writers who sort of go through sort of the I don't know, washing machine of text. You can sense like gentleness, and that's humor as well. And what makes you feel good, I think, after reading a good book. So humor is essential, in a way, wherever it comes from.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and again, I feel a responsibility to apologize for losing your luggage like we did. We hope that
It's not your fault, Anja.
I know, but I hope that that unfortunate event doesn't impact your opinion of Zagreb and books.
Not at all, no.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. And I'm glad that we can laugh about it.
Of course.
So maybe I can say a few words about the fragment that you will read from your novel. So maybe we can read now.
Yeah.
We agreed that Sölvi will read to us a few paragraphs from his novel, The Last Days of My Mother. The novel deals with the relationship between a 37-year-old man and his colorful mother, who traveled to Amsterdam, what a coincidence, together, when the mother has got a terminal cancer diagnosis. And it's a story written with dark humor, where the joy of life wrestles with the fear of death. So, can we please get a sense of the...
It's a bit more than 2 paragraphs. Is that okay? It's like...
sorry. I have a wrong in my...
Yeah,
notes.
okay. It's about like 7 minutes or something.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Do you have the... Okay. So this is the 9th chapter of the novel, which came out in 2009. And yeah, I think Anja has told us about the concept of the novel. It's a young man who follows her terminal cancer mother to Amsterdam and wishes her all the best and is trying to make her life a cool thing at the last days of her life. So this is chapter 9. Ég komst ekki hjá því að hugleiða hana veifið hvort ferð okkar mömmu væri annað og meira en ein stór spurning hinn svokölluðu stórumál til túrnering í tarotlögn lífið, dauðan og ástina og hvort svarið yrði á endanum nokkuð nema holur óáþreifanlegur hljómur sem hyrfi að lokum inn í þögnina. Staðreyndin var sú að sjálfur hafði ég að öllum líkindum marga áratugi til að velta fyrir mér hinum svokölluðu stóru spurningum lífsins, hálfa mannsævi af kvíða, nostalgíu og sjálfsefasemdum á meðan lífið hljóp lengra frá mömmu með hverjum deginum sem leið. Óvéfengjanleiki þessarar staðreyndar sló mig öðru hvoru eins og slita. Eflaust eru öll ferðalög tregafull, því þau afmarka það sem aldrei verður endurtekið. En ferðalag okkar mömmu var jafnvel tregafyllra en svo, stefnulaus ferð að síðustu stoppistöðinni. Þegar við gengum ekki saman eftir síkjunum eða sátum svolítið full heima á hóteli, mamma kom inn í síðbúna jókaferð á sínum svölum og ég djúpt sokkinn í möguleika fjárstýringarinnar í mínu herbyggi, þá hugsaði ég oft hversu einmana hún hlyti í raun að vera og hversu nöturlegt væri að horfa framan í dauðan, augliti til auglitis og láta hann taka frá sér allt það sem aldrei hafði ræst. Innst inni var ég óviss að Úkran, in English it's Ukraine, but it's a drug that was actually invented in Ukraine and it's real. Innst inni var ég viss að Úkran Dr. Friðriks myndi læknana. Ástæðan var ekki aðeins svo að hinn almennu læknisvísindi höfðu kveðið gagnstæðan úrskurð, enda líkurnar hverfandi hvort þeir var. Við höfðum ekki komið til að tryggja framrás lífsins og dauðinn var ómerkingur í gleði okkar, aðeins einn af möguleikunum sem römmuðu ferðalegið inn. Mamma var hér vegna þess að hún átti ekki annarra kosta völ, en sjálfur hafði ég komið til að framkvæma hið ómögulega, að gera hana hamingjusama síðustu dagana sem hún lifði. Efinn að ég stæði undir væntingum nagaði mig reglulega. Mig grunaði að sama hversu hart ég legði að mér Yrði ævintýrið ekki raunverulegt á meðan allt sem fyllti dagana væri stefnulaust rölt okkar borgina. Við drukkum morgunkaffi á svölunum, þræddum dagdruknar göturnar og sóttum söfn, bókabúðir og gallerí áður en við snerum aftur heim og hófum kröftuga sessjón í langdrykkjum framlengda frá kvöldinu áður. Mamma söng Mínus í mól undir bröndurum lönguleina bíltúra og ævintýralega vínflösku í kjósinni. Sögur úr fortíðinni urðu sögur nánustu framtíð. Gamanið kárnaði var sótt jurtasæla og dansað fram eftir nóttu. Hvað sem þessu leið var þó aldrei annað en staðgengill þess sem hafði verið skrifaður í rulluna. En augljósa staðreynd var svo að mömmu vantaði elskuga. Þrátt fyrir ævintýralega skapgerð og líkamlegan styrk hafði hún alltaf verið mjög viðkvæm kona og þráð að hvíla í faðmi einhvers sterkari. Ég hafði lengi velt vöngum yfir þessu ekki síst vegna þess hversu einörð hún var í skoðunum sínum á mínu lífi. Árum saman hafði hún beðið eftir lausn sem kæmi lífi hennar endanlega á réttan kjöl eins og standklukka í stórsjó sem þráir stilltan pendúl. Hljómurinn í sál hennar var líkastur ákalli í skipskaða. Hún vildi bergmála lífsöng og karlmannsbarga. Hvaðan þessi ríka þörf var sprottin vissi ég ekki. Gegnum árin hafði hún dafnað í farvegi ólíkra hliðarlífa, hjónaböndum við rektora, samneyti við kóngafólk og mjög nánu vinfengi við Nikolai og Júli sem hún hitti samkvæmt sama veruleika nokkuð oft á veitingastafnum Skinnbúksin í Kaupmannahöfn ásamt eiginmanni sínum Pettertótt Jensen. Það nægði að mæta mömmu á ballskónum í karaoke til að sjá að draumar hennar I hit the wrong button on my computer.
It happens, don't worry.
Það nægði að mæta mömmu á ballskónum í karaoke til að sjá að draumar hennar voru í hrópandi mótsögn við það sem raunverulega kætti hana. En það breytti ekki niðurstöðunni, hana langaði í karl. Ég hafði kviðið þessu frá upphafi og vonaði að málið leystist af sjálfu sér. Við myndum heitt einhvern fyrirverandi skólameistara á myndlistarsýningu, helst með ólæknandi sjúkdóm og eftir það sviði mamma á sæluskýi á meðan ég reyndi sjálfur fyrir mér á pörunum eins og ljón í frumskógi ástarinnar. En það átti ekki að verða. Að safna saman dópinu, hafa stjórn á virkni þess, frávikum og hárfínum blæbrigðunum. Allt var þetta leikur einn í samanburði við þann ókleifa mór sem ég stóð nú frammi fyrir að gera mömmu í síðasta sinn ástfangna. Að endingu greip ég á það ráð að senda inn einkamála auglýsingu í 3 álitleg menningartímarit, óperublaðið, félagsrit bókasafnsfræðinga og dagblað sem við skildist að enginn læsi nema gamlir sósíalistar. Auglýsingin var svona. Glæsileg, rétt rúmlega 60 kona óskar eftir að hitta mann á svipuðum aldri til að spjalla, fara út að borða með og sögn, leikhús og tónleika. Upplýsingar á ensku með mynd og símanúmeri skilist í pósthólf 349 á aðalpósthúsinu við Radhússtræt fyrir 1. júní. Mér fannst nauðsynlegt að undirstrika orðið mynd, sérstaklega þar sem mamma var talsvert hégómleg þegar kom að útliti mögulegra elskuga sinna. Hún hataði lágvaxna menn og talaði í niðrandi tónum karla sem hefði dottið út úr þvottavélum eins og himpikimpi. Hún átti til að fara út í grafíska lýsingar og hinum á þessum líkamseinkennum sem heilluðu hana, kraftalegar axlir, sterklegt andlit, velmegunarbumba. Henni var fremur illa við mjög granna menn og hafði sömu skoðun á fetipólum. Það var í lagi að karlmenn var ekki beint fríðir eða þeir hefðu nægan sjarma til að vega þar á móti. Fyrst frumstæði í andlitsdráttum mátti vel telja karlmanni til tekna ef augun stöðuðu greind og kjálkarnir áræði. Væmnamenn hataði hún eins og pestina. Hún gerði óspart grín að frímúrunum. Sá hugur sem mamma bar til hins kynsins var í raun ekki til karlmanna heldur karlmenna og í krafti þessi smekks var hún reiðubúin að fyrirgefa ótrúlegustu persónuleikabresti eins og geðveilu og drykkjusýki. Oftar en ekki hafði hann þó farið flatt að þessu og því kom frá mínum bæjardyrum séð ekki til greina að draga bara næstu fyllipyttu upp á ræsinu og planta inn á herbergi til hennar. Valið á karlmenninu var mikilvægast alls hinn endanlega pensilstróka listaverksins. Ég var orðinn talsvert spenntur þegar ég gekk loks út í sumarheitan fyrsta dag júnímánaðar með stefnuna á pósthúsið. Yfir 40 svarbréf völtu út úr hólfinu, þar af 19 sem ég þóttu nógu álitleg til að setja í sérstakan bunka. Af þeim fengu 12 umsækjendur plús fyrir nýtni, framúrskarandi útlit eða vel orðaða lýsingu á skapgerð sinni. Ég raðaði bréfunum í þá röð sem mér þótti álitlegust og hringdi svo á línuna. Flestum þótti skrítið að heyra ekki byggt í mömmu og sögðust ekki standi í neinni vitleysu. Ég bað hina að staldra ögn við. Mamma væri greind og skemmtileg kona sem hefði óvænt þurft að breiða sér úr landi. Henni þætti heillandi ráðstöfun ef tilvonandi elskuði sín ætti við mig stuttspjall á kaffi Köttisark í Spúistrad að hún kæmi til landsins. Valmennin sem eftir stóðu voru 6. Öll komin á eftirlaun og féllust á að hitta mig á klukkutímafresti á skúraskiptum þriðjudegi í byrjun júní. Fullur eftirvæntingar kom ég mér fyrir á róðlugu horfborði hálftíma fyrir tilskilinn tíma, grunlaus þær sjálfskipuðu pyntingar sem biðu mig. Aumlegra sýnishorn af mannkyninu hafði ég aldrei séð, en ræflana sem týndust inn á kaffi Köttisark þessa ömurlegu dagstund. Fyrstur á dagskrá var John Devanó, Bandaríkjamaður, myndarlegur náungi með hákinnbein og áhuga á leikhúsfræðum. Mér leist strax nokkuð vel á hann og sá ég fram á að geta aflýst næstu fundum, opna kampavín og drukkið með rærulausan inn á einhvern streipstaðinn í Rauðakverfunni í fagnaðarskyni. En þegar hann minntist í 20. skipti I'm doing it wrong again with my computer.
And we also
No,
have some technical difficulties.
Okay, I'm just about to finish.
Yeah, because we lost the translation behind you like a few seconds ago. But if you have a few more sentences...
Yeah, just a few more sentences.
Yeah, okay, great.
Mér leist strax nokkuð vel á hann og sagði fram á að geta aflýst næstu fundum og opna kampavín og drukkið með rænulausan inn á einhvern streipstaðinn í Rauðakverfunni í fagnaðarskyni. En þegar hann minntist að í 20. skiptið á nýlátna eiginkonu Sölvi bílslys 1996 var mér endanlega ljóst að den Devanó var ekki að leita að mömmu, heldur ljúfri, hjartareitni suðuríkjastúlku með 8. stigi píanóleik og hækkaða altrödd sem í 12 ár hafði ekkert verið nema þögnin ein. Við höfum ekki tíma í slíkt. Ég vissi sem var að mamma myndi enga þolinmæði hafa fyrir einhverju löngu, dauðri kellingu sem þætti merkilegri en allt annað. Ég kvaddi John Devanó og tók á móti Stefán Sauerbridge, þýskum offetusjúklingi sem myndaðist vel eða var á öðrum kosti fótóshoppari á heimsvísu. Eftir þetta fóru fundirnir aðeins versnandi. Ben Henderson, fasteignasali, illa þefjandi skegggapi með rámkverfu og psoriasis, Valmir Flint, pervert. Síðan forfallinn alkohólisti frá Rotterdam og Finnskland eða með frönsutrauma. Í stuttu máli staðfestu stefnumótin allt það sem mamma hafði árum saman haldið fram einhleypa karlmenn yfir 50. Thank you.
Thank you for it. It was really great. And now maybe we can hear something from Jónas. Jónas will read to us a part from his novel The Death of a Forest, which is included in our anthology. So please, thank you.
Það voru sprengjur undir skóginum okkar. Hér gróf skissa. Þar voru í laginu eins og kaffibrúsar með stjeli ef það skilst ekki á myndinni og þakta riði enda á seinni heimsstyrjöldinni. Ég hef dansað á þessum drápstólum alla mína ævi á þess að vita því. Af hverju í ósköpunum voru sprengjur undir trjánum? þær skrifast á herinn. Bretarnir voru með æfingar þarna í stríðinu. Kóræfingar, kallaði pabbi þær. Því hermennirnir voru ungir og óreyndir og rjóðir í kinnum eins og kórdrengir. Ég veit ekki hvers slags fyllirí var til þess að sprengjurnar urðu eftir. En hvað sem því líður þá sukkuðu þær ofan í börðin og móana og smám saman greri yfir þær. Svo stungu mamma og pabbi niður lerkinu. Ræturnar á trjánum hafa vafist eins og fingur utan sprengjurnar og kýtla þær. Þær komu í ljós skömmu eftir að skógurinn eyðilagðist. Þetta haust þegar hætti ekki að regna. Þá rann jarðvegurinn niður hlíðina. Hann kuðlaðist upp eins og teppið neðst í brekkunni. Eftir stóð lítill og skeifulega trjágarður. Engin úrkoma í kortunum hér á Spáni en ég hlusta samt eftir rigningu. Ég fara að hugsa þessa andvökunótt heima þegar úrhellið byrjaði. Hildur var búin að skrúfa upp í ofninu. Hún vill hafa svefnherbergið eins og bakar á. Ég beið eftir að hann sofnaði, læddist á fram úr, opnaði gluggann, laðist aftur niður og hlustaði á rigninguna syngja á þakinu. Rigningarhljóð hafa alltaf talað til mín, enda líka minn að mestu leyti vatn. Það vill gleymast. Holdið hinn háværi minnihluti líkamanns. Fyrst var hægt að greina staka dropa. Þeir splundruðust á þakinu hver af eftir öðrum. Svo fóru þagnirnar á milli þeirra að styttast. Vatnið streymdi niður þakið eftir gluggum og veggjum og rann yfir heimreiðina, vökvaði mórsan og illgressið í rifunum milli hellnanna og þaðan rann svo lækur meðfram gangstéttinni ofan í hofræsið. Það glumdi í tómri málningafötu sem var á hvolfi á pallinum. Á plastdúkurinn yfir beðinu var eins og illa strekkt tromma. Garðurinn var orðinn að ruslageymslu. Ég hafði gleymt að ganga frá. Þar voru verkfæri og viður sem ég átti eftir að bera á. Spýturnar springa og vinda sig, hugsaði ég, og verkfærin munu ryðga. En ég nennti ekki að rífa mig á fætur miðja nótt til að bjarga þeim. Hildur vill að garðurinn sé snyrtilegur. Almennt hún viðkvæmari fyrir sóðaskapin ég. Líklega það uppveldið. Mamma sankaði sér drasli og pabbi var nískur til að henda því, sérstaklega eftir að mamma dó. Hildur var aftur á móti alin upp við áráttukennt meinlæti og það liði ekki meir en 3 dagar milli allsherjar þrifa á heimilinu. Hún hefur reynt að slíta tengslin við barnæskuna og unglingsárin, tala varla við þau gömlu lengur nema á afmælisdögum barnanna, en þrifnaðaræðið blundar enn í henni. Þegar við keyptum lóðina og byggðum húsið, vildi Hildur rífa upp gróðurinn og slétta alveg úr garðinum. Ég átti erfitt með að fá hana mitt band. Hún vill ekki láta segja sig fyrir verkum, það minnir henni á berskuna. Við rifumst í nokkra vikur og á lokum fengu elrið og víðurinn að fjúka. Við settum glansmisspil og girðingu kringum lóðina, sættumst á það sem snyrtilega lausn. En reynitréð upp á hólnum fékk að standa og annað bættist við. Við létum aspina líka í friði og birkitréð við vesturhlið hússins. Ég reyndi að halda lóðinni í góðu ástandi, en stundum drógust framkvæmdir og ég óður einu í annað. Hluti dagaði uppi og garðurinn fylltist af drasli. Og þá var ég fegin því að Hildur væri sofandi við hliðina á mér og heyrði ekki rigninguna lenda á tómum málningafötunni eða hjólbörurnar fyllast af vatni. Hildur verður reyndar aldrei andvaka. Hún leikur sér að því að sofna. Trjátegundir gefa frá sér ólík hljóð, bæði í vindi og rigningu. Það er hægt að bera kennsl á þau með lokuð augum. Ég heyrði greinilega í birkitrjánum og sá fyrir mér hvernig börkurinn á þeim glansaði eins og ný tímarit. Og svo blés vindurinn á laufblöðin eins og verið væri að fletta blaðsíðunum. Ég fór að hugsa skóginn minn, þó að þar hafði ekki verið nein lauftré. En rigningin kann líka að spila á barr. Í inngangi bókarinnar Saga skóganna frá fornlífi, sem ég las meira en 100 sinnum í æsku, stóð að vatn og gróður ættu í átakalegasta ástarsambandi á jörðinni. Lán í óláni hversu illa gekk að draga fjölskylduna þangað í lautaferðir, hugsaði ég þegar sprengjurnar komið í ljós í skóginum. En ég segi ekki að þessi afhjúpun hafi glatt mig. Þetta var ekki skemmtileg leið til að láta bjarga sér, að þurfa að horfa upp á tortímingu skógarins. Þetta voru aftur á móti góðu tíma fyrir spekingana sem kepptust við að þykjast hafa séð þetta fyrir. Ekki sprengjunar heldur að skógarinn myndi renna niður hlíðina. Spekingarnir létu eins og ekkert hefði komið þeim inn á óvart. Þeir sögðu það á allra vitorði að landið væri ómögulegt til skógræktar, því það var bratt og stutt í klöppina undir því. Spurningin hefði því ekki verið hvort heldur hvenær. Meira að segja elsti kunningi pabba tók þátt í þessu, hann Haraldur, sem einhver misheppnaðasti spámaður sem sögur fara af. Í nokkra áratugi var hann handviss að alþjóðasamskipti framtíðarinnar færi fram á mandarín. Enska væri á leiðinni út, það væri augljóst út frá tölfræði fólksfjölgun. Hann píndi sig þess vegna til að læra kínversku. Var sér út segulbandsspólur og kennslubækur frá Danmörku og ekki átt hann auðvitað með dönskuna, þurfti dansk-íslenska orðabók og kínversk-danska til að botna eitthvað í þessu. Stritaði við námið í fleiri ár upp á eigin spýtur. Og hvaða alþjóða viðskipti í bígerð hjá sjálflærðum biblíavirka á Íslandi, var hann spurður. Ætli að þurfi ekki eitthvað að túlka, segir hann. Ní há, sögðu bensíntittirnir í Ólís þegar þeir heilsuðu honum. Og í vinnunni var hann kallaður Kínveri. Þegar ég var lítill trúði ég honum eins og Jesú Kristi. Ég fekk martraðir allir í þorpinu töluðu kínversku nema ég. Ég hugsa að Haraldur hafi viljað bæta fyrir vittlusuna sem hafði oltið upp úr honum í gegnum tíðina með því að rexa í mér út á skóginum. En það var þreytandi að þurfa að hlusta á hann á meðan ég reyndi að syrgja.
Thank you, Jónas. Time flies. I'm not sure if we have some more time for some hard-hitting questions. And maybe I would like to give an opportunity to the audience to ask our authors if they want something to find out.
Did you find, did the main character find the match for the mother? We will never know, right?
Yeah, I can tell you, yeah. Well, after that chapter, he is suggested to go to a close-by destination because he gets familiar with the bar waitress at Café Kortisag, and she actually thinks he's searching for a date for himself because he's just watching him in far destination. So she suggests him to go to a club where gay men meet, and he goes there in the belief he's going to find his mother's love mate. So there's another misunderstanding there. But in the end, yeah, she falls in love. Actually, it's like 4 weddings and a funeral. Everything is good at the end, but she dies. I have to tell you that she has terminal cancer, and you can't run away from death. But if you can do death in a good way, I think it's better than just close your eyes and being at an estrangement. So the ending, Noah told you everything about the novel. You don't have to read it.
No, we wouldn't.
Yeah, it's sort of, it's like bittersweet.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, I have a question, but it's a bit more serious than Mika's. Both you and the ladies earlier said that you find the books that you write, like a safe space, like a space where you can deal with some of your fears or things that you cannot deal with in your real life. So my question is, how do you feel about reading? Is it the same kind of process when you read not your books but books of other writers? So is it something completely different or maybe similar?
Like reading aloud to have a venue, like reading
No,
other books.
reading when you read by yourself, like at home when you take a book and read. Like, can you compare the process of writing and reading for you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it must be a version of the same thing. And maybe, just thinking about it, maybe when one is writing, one is trying to replicate the effects of having read something that has made you feel, made an effect on you. So I think definitely it's maybe in that light it's kind of desperate to get through it. You read and you feel these amazing feelings, and then that's not enough. You're kind of an addict for this catharsis or whatever it is, and you turn to writing yourself. You get high on your own supply, as they say. So yeah, I think it's definitely connected.
But you don't have like problems reading for entertainment, because I used to read really a lot when I was a teenager and when I was in my early 20s. But once I became a writer, everything had an effect on me. So I was always like, oh, this is great. So writing notes and like engulfing this great world of thought and of how people transgress that world of thought. And for a while I sort of lost my capacity or ability to enjoy reading literature, because, you know, I was always stuck at page 3, you know, especially when reading great writers. So I really had to take a vacation when I read, and then I'm not writing. To enjoy literature, I can't be writing myself, because, you know, then I just become influenced. And, you know, but yeah, it's a strange combination of enjoyment and learning in a way.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think the answers were really interesting and inspiring. Do we have someone else, maybe? No? Then should we wrap this up? Okay. I would like to talk to you some more, but we can continue this conversation in more informal context. So thank you both for joining us this evening. It was my pleasure. Thank you for coming to Booksa, and check out the schedule, and see you tomorrow here also.
Thank you.